Today is Saturday, February 22nd, 2025, and this is episode 298 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat.
Mr. Bell, how are you, my good sir?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. It's Saturday. It's 50 degrees in Atlanta, so not too bad, not too cold. It's been cold this week, so
it's a heck of a lot warmer than it's been. So
yeah, so it's good. I'm damn happy to be here. How's that?
Awesome. I'll be. I think probably the next time we do this, I'll be at the beach. So there you go.
The Southern Command, as they say.
It's that time of year where I start spending 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off.
Very cool. If I hide myself in your luggage and pop out, just don't mind me. I'll just sit in a corner.
We'll have cats and dogs and one more person. It'll be a big deal.
Fair enough. But anyhow,
so before we get started, just a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and not those of our employers. And although they could be for the right price, and also a big thank you to our Patreon donors. Thank you very much for sponsoring our show. If you would like to help support the show, you can do so on our Patreon site. Is patreon.com/defensivesec. That's SEC, not the other thing, which is, still something we're looking at.
But this is a family show. That would be a different podcast feed.
It's a whole different podcast.
Yeah.
That's right. All right.
And I echo that. Thank you to our Patreon donors. You guys are awesome. We really do appreciate it.
So jumping into our stories, the first one comes from Ars Technica, and the title here is Notorious Crooks Broke into a Company Network in 48 Minutes. Here's how.
Dun, dun, dun.
So this is a permutation on something we've talked about a couple shows back, where the victim company was targeted by an adversary with just an overwhelming amount of spam. And I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 or 20 different employees at this company were targeted. And the spam that is being sent by the adversary is benign. It's just a nuisance. It doesn't have anything malicious in it. It's apparently off the wall enough that it doesn't really get caught by most of the spam classifiers and whatnot. But it's a ridiculous volume. And the adversary then they've obviously picked their marks, and what they will attempt to do, and what they did in this instance, is contacted the quote victims at their victim company over Microsoft Teams. So that's kind of problem number one. And they purported to be from a help desk, from the company's help desk, offering, basically saying, hey, look, I see that you're having this big spam problem. I want to help you out. And, at that point, the victims tend to be very, I would say, open to getting help because of the amount of spam they're getting. And the request from the actor is to set up a remote assistance session, which in this instance, two of the employees actually fell for the lure and initiated that session. And the article here in Ars Technica does a pretty light fly through of the issue or of the attack. If you follow the link in the article to the ReliaQuest report, there's I would say a much more detailed analysis of what actually happened, and they walk you through the individual phases and what their recommendations are on how to mitigate and detect each step of the attack as it happened in this instance. But the one thing that was very clear to me when I read through both the article and the report is that the victim company here was very, very, very targeted. The there appears to be some indication that one of the service accounts, one of the privileged accounts they had, they used in the attack, they actually already had credentials for, and the belief is that they purchased that through some other initial access broker, but they probably weren't able to use that credential to actually get into the organization. But they very clearly understood the technology stack used by the company. They were also very adept at moving around, moving laterally. So once they had access to the employees' laptops, they started using DLL sideloading. They were trying to push out that sideload, basically malicious DLL, using SMB to some other systems. When that didn't work as they had expected, they failed over to RDP to transfer it, and then they used remote PowerShell commands to create scheduled jobs on those other systems, and basically just methodically crawled through the organizations or the victim's network, installing the malware, which ultimately led to the fairly significant compromise in this instance. So, what I liked about the actual report from ReliaQuest, by the way, is that it does a very thorough job of explaining what they observed. Because ReliaQuest was the incident response company, and I, by the way, have no affiliation with them. So, but again, hey, like if you
Not
want, not
not
yet.
after the incident in Vegas.
It's true.
No,
Yeah,
I'm
we're
kidding.
not supposed to talk about that.
True. The judge was very specific on that.
But I really like the way that they decompose each phase of the attack and provide, both guidance on how to mitigate it and also guidance on how to detect it. Now, I will say that their detection is very focused on their product offering, but it's generic enough. It's described in a generic enough way that I think you can use that for pretty much any reasonable SIM or other uh, security application.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me, and we can certainly get into some of the other recommendations, is once you get this flood, if you're the victim and you get this flood of emails and you get IT reaching out to help, which interestingly, by the way, their IT department got great customer service reviews from the victims for being so proactive in reaching out to help them. So, bonus for their CSAT scores. But not allowing your employees to activate any sort of remote access tool, I think, is the key thing that a
Yes.
lot of these are based on. So there's a bunch of different ways to do this, whether it's built-in tooling in Microsoft, whether it's having them load a third party like TeamViewer or something else, or turning on RDP. That seems to be one of the key first stages of this particular attack type of these fake IT department people reaching out to help. That's the first thing they would do, is get that user to grant them access. If they're a legitimate IT department, they shouldn't need that. They should have their own ability to grant access to themselves,
Right.
you would think. The other thing, and I don't use Microsoft Teams, so I'm a little unsure how this works. I've used Slack much more extensively. A third party getting into your Microsoft Teams instance and communicating with you must not look very obvious as a external person if they can appear to be like the IT department. Like in the Slack world, it's just not easy to impersonate someone or a department without already being granted access by an administrator. I don't know how this works in Teams, but this is a thing we've heard over and over again. So there must be a more opaque view of what organization somebody's in who's communicating with you on Teams.
So they actually touched on this in the report a bit, and
Yeah.
and I think we talked about it in one of the prior attack decompositions as well. The adversary is using Microsoft's kind of generic cloud hosted domain. It's on Microsoft.com. And you can create, as a customer, you can create subdomain dot on Microsoft.com. And so what the adversaries are doing here is they're coming up with creative little subdomains like, I'm obviously this isn't it, right? But helpdesk dot on Microsoft.com. It's obviously not, if you're an astute and paying attention, you're going to recognize that that isn't associated with your company, but the fact that it has the Microsoft name in it probably lends some credibility to the attacker. I do believe, by the way, that there's also a way for, I'm not super familiar with Teams either, although everything I hear about it is it's a pretty horrible, pretty soul-sucking application. Not because of the technology, just because of the way
You
it's
worked
used.
at IBM forever. You're used to that. Come on now.
I did. I lived through Same Time and Lotus Notes, so
I was going to
yes,
say.
I'm very familiar with that concept. But um, I believe there is a way that you can restrict external parties from accessing your Microsoft Teams space. I think, though, that there are some companies who intentionally do that so they can converse with business partners and whatnot. But perhaps this is an opportunity to rethink some of those decisions. Now,
Yeah.
there was an interesting thing in here too, which I hadn't really thought of, and it's still kind of playing out in my mind. Like, gosh, is this a good idea? Obviously, this ReliaQuest is a security vendor, and I'm not trying to hype them up in any way, but they obviously have some sort of security agent that can help mitigate different types of things. But one of the recommendations is that they have a detection capability to detect the that your one of your employees is interacting with a fish via Microsoft Teams, and if there are if the sequence of events in that interaction plays out according to the rule, it actually will disable the Active Directory or the domain account of that employee. So the idea being that if somebody's in the process of falling for a fish, it just cuts it off by deactivating their ID.
Which might be unfortunate for that employee, but stops lateral movement right there and
Correct.
shuts down further exploitation.
Right. And then they further down, and I don't think this is actually done by their tooling, but they make a recommendation that if you see interactive login sessions using accounts that are supposed to just only be service accounts, that you also similarly deactivate those proactively at the as a response to a login event. Now, obviously, you have to make sure that that you're using those service IDs in a way that you think, so you're not creating pandemonium in your IT environment. But that's also a really good idea. And by the way, I think it's a good idea for many reasons, not the least of which is typically there's different password restrictions and password rotation and multi-factor authentication restrictions on service accounts versus people accounts.
Yeah, indeed. I think the other interesting takeaway is how quickly the bad actors try to break out of their initial foothold on the user's machine and move deeper into the environment.
Yeah, so
It's
that
pretty
I think
aggressive.
it was kind of the headline. We buried
Yeah.
that a little bit. That they the adversary here moved at kind of breakneck speed, and the point is, if this trend continues, and one of the points in this article is that ReliaQuest, and the company that wrote the report, is saying, as compared to 2023 and 2024, when this incident happened, their observation is that it's that the time for an actor to achieve their goals is continuing to go down, and this 48 minutes is in line with what they're seeing on average. And that as a defense, as a blue team, that's we're not looking for actors who are on our network for months, weeks, or months, or even years before they try to do their thing. Like, if you're going to want to defend against this, you have to come up with a very different approach to, to detection and response, as opposed to what we often have done in the past.
Or just don't use Active Directory.
Yeah, well, I do believe the A in APT still stands for Active Directory. So, but I think we're gonna have to come up with a new term for this. Like, APT is it's kind of outdated. Those are the nation states who are typically have a more of a intellectual property theft or surveillance objective to their attacks. And they're obviously they're advanced, and the persistent is that they will tend to be present in your environment for a very long time, moving around very quietly. And the intention is to not draw attention to themselves, as opposed to this, which is, I would call it like a moderately sophisticated, fast attacker. So, like, we have to come up with some new acronym to describe this. Otherwise, nobody's going to take it seriously.
Yeah, we'll get our crack research team on that. I'm sure we can come up with something very clever with a good acronym.
Yeah. Right. So,
like high-speed adversarial action.
Yeah. Well, it has to be pronounceable. Like, if you have to, got to be a vowel in there.
All right. We'll work on this. Maybe I'm sure we can come up with something, and we'll put it on a T-shirt.
Absolutely. All right, our next story comes from Dark Reading, and the title here is 4 Low-Cost Ways to Defend Your Organization Against Deepfakes.
Now, let me just say up front, this is some vendor spam a little bit, but we can talk about some of their ideas.
Yes, this will really, I think there's one good idea in here of the 4. So obviously, deepfake enabled social engineering attacks is becoming very pervasive. I was actually, I in my spare time, one of the things I like doing is I like to watch videos about woodworking. And so there's one of the creators, Black Hills, I think it's also the name of a security company, coincidentally. But they were recently mimicked by a scammer who convinced a victim, that it was this creator. Obviously, they had lots of video of the creator from their YouTube videos, offering to sell a table, but this table was like $15,000. So, and I, it was a complete scam. And anyway, like, that's completely outside the corporate world. And what we're starting to see there, we don't have the article, here to talk about this time, but there's the um, recent story about a publicly listed minerals company who was just scammed out of $500,000. There's a lot of money, especially when you talk about using this technique to go after, to enable kind of that business email compromise attack, to steal like payroll or vendor payments and whatnot. Like, there's a lot of money here, and so I think we should
Yeah.
expect that we're going to see a significant uptick in this as that technology becomes much more commonly available to adversaries and easier to use. So, so
And
anyway, but
likely a lot more sophisticated than just simply some sort of business email compromise. Like once I've
yes,
got good, solid, deep fake technology to impersonate an executive, it might be a lot more interesting. It might get a lot more complicated than just, hey, I need you to transfer money to this offshore bank account for this secret deal I've going, which is what we often see. It could be a very long con potentially, depending on how clever and interested and complex the scam may become.
it's a good point. Good point. There is an opportunity there for kind of that long tail persistent attack. Um, so yeah, I think you're right there. So the first recommendation is to not overlook the power of well considered processes, and I think this is really the key one. I think the rest of them are kind of I'll call it bunk, but I I really think that as a response to this increasing threat, we really have to make sure that we've identified where those kind of weak points are. Like what, from an adversary perspective, what things would they go after? And then you've got to figure out how to bolster those processes so that they have the right kind of mutual authentication in the context of like a phone call or a video call, so that your employees have some hope in hell of not falling victim to this as a matter of process, and not relying on like them recognizing that, oh, Jerry said a word that I've never heard him say before. Maybe that's actually, maybe this is not really Jerry. So that's I really think that's where where we have to head.
Yeah, I agree, and it's going to be difficult. Uh, but we've talked about this a few times in previous shows. But if you have a well honed process, let's say it's for sending, screwing up my mic, sending money to a new contact that needs certain MFA enabled, cannot be easily spoofed process steps. And you've all agreed to that. It doesn't matter then if the CEO is getting on a Zoom call with you and yelling at you. If you've got to have the ability to say, "I'm sorry, boss, I understand, but we all agreed we have to follow the process. So please follow the process, and I'll be happy to do that." But that can be tough to do when you're getting yelled at by what you think to be as your boss.
Yeah, well, in the spirit of most social engineering attacks, there's there's the aspect of urgency injected, and
Mm-hmm.
so if it is, two or three somebody that's two or three levels above you in your company, yelling at you, sure, you're probably you're probably not all that familiar with them, and
Right.
B, you're probably afraid of losing your job.
So not just urgency, but level of authority, an authority figure, which is another
Right.
common um, social engineering tactic that we see.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
So, but
so
not to overstate that one, but I agree with you. I think that particular control is your best defense against most types of social engineering that are trying to do some sort of business email compromise or change. Another one I've seen a lot. I've personally seen this one. A bad actor got access to somebody's email system and was sending an email as an internal employee trying to change bank information for good, valid invoices.
mhm,
So the invoice was valid, the bill was valid, the business relation was valid. What they were trying to change was the banking information of where to send the money to pay that invoice.
right.
So a lot of it looks very legit, except for that one, that one change. And if it looks like it's coming from a legitimate person, that's an interesting problem, right? To have a process to build around. So for high level changes like that are very sensitive, I think it behooves our listeners in these organizations to try to figure out, how can I build a social engineering resistant process that, again, is not too slow, not too unwieldy, doesn't slow the business down too much, but would cause a bad actor to run into a roadblock they couldn't overcome, or at least raise enough suspicion uh, that this likely wouldn't happen or couldn't go through.
Yep. I'll add to that it's not all the problem space isn't all inside your own four walls. We have seen repeated instances where you as a organization have suppliers, and you've accrued expenses that you owe your money to your suppliers for, and sometimes those suppliers themselves are the ones that get hacked, and so it's their email system that's been hacked, and unbeknownst to your supplier, someone using that supplier's email system, either directly or through some sort of some sort of spoofing, is attempting to change where your company is paying that bill. And so this, by the way, has happened, fairly frequent now. But certainly, I think this is going to add another dimension, because if, like, it's, the accounts receivable person from your supplier wanting to get on a Zoom call with you to talk about some changes to, where to send your payments. Like, this is tough. This is going to be
Yeah.
tough.
In that case, maybe you have a known good phone number that you can call or something. I don't know. I mean,
Yes.
each of these is very situational, but some process that people just, that is well designed, that is well thought out, that is well documented, that feels maybe weird to the people who are trying to follow the process, but disrupts these sorts of attack types.
Right. Right. And by the way, there's a lot of money at stake here, so the adversaries will probably adapt, or at least attempt to adapt to,
Sure.
what we are doing to mitigate the issue. So the other go ahead.
You know why bad actors try to steal money from businesses, right?
Because that's where the money is.
Correct. Thank you for ruining my punchline.
I knew where you were going with that. All right. So the other recommendations are to sharpen your training and testing initiatives to reflect the latest real world threats, including deepfakes. So, I was thinking about, as the CISO of a company, like, I could create a deepfake of myself and use that as part of my phishing training, and how
You could.
ridiculous that would be. I
I think,
look, I don't know how effective that would be.
no.
Just,
And here, and we were just talking about this, I think, in the last show about, or recent show about phishing training and, social engineering training, and how there's this mindset with security folks of arrogance and superiority and gleefulness of tricking their employees.
right.
I don't know that I would recommend that in this case either. I know I wouldn't recommend it. What I may want to do, which I think would be effective, is the first time I introduce this concept, say, all right, finance team, I want to make you aware of the state of the art of social engineering techniques. I'm going to show you a deepfake video that is very good. I'm not trying to trick you. Like, I'm educating you on this. I want to show you the capabilities of why we want to do this, and not just try to then, say, oh, by the way, the last 30 minutes, you thought you were hearing from the CEO. You weren't. That was a deepfake. Aha, I got you. Like, I don't think that primes people to learn. That just embarrasses them, and it makes them wonder, right? Why? How did I get fooled? And what's wrong with me? And, or anger or pride. I think it's the wrong approach, but so many people in this industry want to take that approach. Let me just trick them and show them how dumb they are. Like, no, show them how good the bad guys are by teaching them. Like, have empathy for them. They're the victims here. So we live and breathe this stuff all day long. If you're listening to this show, you probably live and breathe this stuff all day long. And we forget things that we take for granted, that we intuitively know, that is core to our cognitive function, is nowhere near normal baseline for most people. We are weird, right? We look at things very differently than most people. So what we take for granted as table stakes knowledge is not common in people outside of our industry. And we forget that all the time.
Yeah, and by the way, even if they have it, it's not the thing that motivates them.
Right.
Their mission is something else. It's processing payroll or mailing out invoices or whatever.
So I do think from an education standpoint, showing people what is possible is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Tricking them is not.
I agree. So next one is analyze and identify your organization's unique. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, I just
Mm-hmm.
argued with myself in my own brain. The only reason I would change this is if I approach this from like a purple teaming, red teaming approach. I teach them, I show them, I have a very strict process, and then I think it may make sense in a high stakes environment to test if that process is followed.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. But more as a test of controls and not as part of like a baseline security. It's not
Right.
not like a phishing simulation test. More of like
Right.
like you said, a red team type test.
Okay. Now, sorry, I will not interrupt for the next 1 minute.
We'll see how that works. So anyway, the next one was to analyze and identify your organization's unique risk factors. I do think this one makes good sense because again you can't think about every single interaction you have with or every person in your company has as a potential deepfake scenario. Like you've got to identify where those key processes, key points of vulnerability are, and focus on enhancing the controls around those. So I would say this one should be like number 0 on the list, at least in terms of priority. And then finally, cultivate a culture that errs on the side of caution, which don't click on any links, don't open any attachments, don't join any WebExes. If you're not sure, you should call your CISO and ask them if to join your WebEx and see if you have your CISO tell if that's really the CEO or.
I think
By
you
the
should
way,
just not get out of bed.
exactly. Not in the context of this, but one of the things that bothered me or kind of drove me a little bit crazy. On the one hand, it was good because like people gave a damn, but on the other hand, like, it made me crazy. Was people sending me emails as a CISO asking me, "Is this real or is this phishing?" And
Yeah.
and they were not emails of consequence. So like there were in particular there were some very specific executives who like had to adjudicate every email they got. Like, is this phishing or is it legitimate? Like, if you're gonna delete it anyway, just freaking delete it.
Right.
I mean, I get the point. I'm happy that you're thinking along those lines, but you know, if it's not something that's material to you, or you think it's obviously if it's something that looks like it's targeting you, that's perhaps a different discussion. But that wasn't what was happening. So, look, I think we can overdo it here. Again, we have a business to run, and I think we have to find ways of developing and implementing and operating controls that allow people to do their jobs. The joke in the industry is like you give people a link click clicking box, and then you tell them don't click on the links using the link clicking box, and it's ridiculous. Like it's so I really think we've got to look inward and figure out how we do a better job of constructing more robust controls that don't rely on people, not kind of slowing down their job, because they have objectives. They have to meet performance goals and whatnot. And anyway, I'm beating a dead horse now.
2 words: AI fixes everything.
I was thinking about that. Because we've talked about this problem a couple of times. I have probably no fewer than 10 messages sitting in my LinkedIn DMs from different companies who have listened to us talk about this problem in the past, telling me that they want to come and demo their solution to the deepfake problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what they're doing. They make me tired. Like
Well,
I just feel dirty when I go to LinkedIn. Sorry, I'm sorry. The
that's not
little
why you feel
diversion.
dirty. That's not why you feel dirty. Don't lie to me.
You're probably right.
There is something to be said for potential deep fake detection technology, but it's such a moving target.
I'm skeptical. I'm
Yeah,
just very skeptical.
and I still think the first item on this list is still the more robust, reliable solution, because it catches no matter what type of social engineering is going on, which is the firm, well-designed, smart process.
Yeah, I was thinking, and it's a silly thought, but I'm going to say it
Aren't
anyway because I'm a
aren't
silly
they all?
guy. What we really need is a way to authenticate us as people in the context of like a call. So,
Maybe if like the government had like a central database of authenticators that we could all.
no, I'm thinking more like something that's tied to your company's directory, and so like two people that are talking on the phone can click a button and you on your phones, and you can kind of mutually authenticate that way. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the right solution is. I haven't put a whole lot of thought into it, but it seems like perhaps there's something there.
I don't even know if you're actually Jerry.
I
We're doing this remotely. You could be
I
just
don't
a.
even know if I'm Jerry. So let's
You
be
could be
honest.
replaced. You could have been replaced last night in your sleep. How would you know?
That's true. Was it Buddhists say that you are a different person every time you wake up?
It's like the problem with transporters in Star Trek.
Good point.
If somebody is completely recreated with all their memories and all of their, intact, they think they're that person, but they're actually a duplicate. Like, who's the real? I'm just telling you. When you went to sleep last night, you could have woken up. You could be a pod person.
Now I'm going to be very anxious now. Maybe we'll move
Now,
on.
now you're going to be anxious. That's what made
So
you anxious.
how about we move on? The next story comes from We Live Security, which is the ESET blog, and the title here is "Deceptive Development Targets Freelance Developers." This is a spin on something we talked about a couple of shows ago. The deal here is, I guess it's purported to be North Koreans, although they actually, unlike most attempts to attribute attacks to nation states, they actually do a reasonable job of laying out why they assert it's North Korea, and you can come to your own conclusion after reading the article. But um, the assertion here is that North Korean adversaries are attempting to lure freelance developers, specifically in the uh, blockchain slash cryptocurrency space. But the reason, I don't care so much about that. I think most of that's a scam anyway. Uh, I think it's more of a harbinger of things to come. Like I think this technique is likely to be used in other contexts, so it's better to get ahead of it than not. But anyway, the attack here is to lure would-be freelancers to apply for these freelance positions. The quote recruiter engages with the candidate, and through a series of discussions, sets up a what I'll loosely call a coding test. And so the adversary here will either send directly a set of files or provide access to a private GitHub repository, or GitLab or Bitbucket or one of the other code repositories that the victim has to download, and then has an assignment, and they have to actually make some change to the code, and that part is real. But the attack comes in when they're asked, and by the way, like before you send this back to me, the recruiter, you should compile it and make sure that it runs and does what you say, because otherwise you would look silly. And that's where the problem comes in. So the code it's actually typically actual code. It doesn't necessarily have like an embedded binary or anything like that, but what it does have is some malicious code appended at the end of a very long comment, which is then unescaped, so that some at the end of a very long comment, which extends off the side of the screen. And unless you have something in your code editor that allows you to see the wrapped comment, which is not the default, by the way, in most editors, you're not going to see it. And that is where the malicious code lives. And so once you run that, then it will infect your computer. There's a variant of that where the malicious recruiter will ask the candidate to get onto a web meeting, and of course they use some wacky kind of web conferencing software that requires the candidate to go and download an application to participate in the web meeting, which of course is malware. The idea in all of that, by the way, is ultimately to steal, at least in this instance, is to steal cryptocurrency, which is apparently what North Korea is really big on, trying to, get some cash for their various military programs, apparently, allegedly. But again, I think that as a technique, we're very likely to see this being adopted by more garden variety threat actors, and especially in this time of interesting employment. I think it's very likely that employees, like current employees who perhaps are seeking jobs at at other employment at other organizations, because they're trying to get out of something they don't like, whether it's return to office or what have you. We know from previous discussions that there are this is an attack technique that adversaries are using, where the employee is just like a bystander, or they're a victim of convenience. The actual intended victim is the company. And so that's where, I mean, I'm not trying to trivialize the instance that they're talking about here, where it's an individual person who's the victim, but I think where this is ultimately headed is as a tactic to attack and gain entry into organizations through employees who are looking for work.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's an easy step to go from employees looking for work to I'm willing to pay you for a side gig, if as a freelancer, to do this code work for me. I'll pay you $5,000.
Right.
And then have something that looks fairly legitimate, but I'm attaching this sort of malware that I'm hoping you're going to do the work on your corporate machine or something that has access to your corporate environment, or in some way it gives me more insight into the corporate environment. So
Exactly.
I could see that being worth the investment to some of these threat actors, depending on how valuable the target is. So it's not even, because one thing we don't talk about is, hey, if I come up to somebody in your help desk and say, I want to pay you $10,000 to install this piece of software, there's a certain percentage of them that are going to say yes, or
Mm-hmm.
employees in general, especially disgruntled employees. This, they don't even know necessarily that they're unwittingly being a bad actor for you, and they're just making money on the side and everybody's happy while they're sneaking some sort of quiet malware into the environment.
Yeah, and to carry on to that, if you have an employee is doing this, they're going to be doing it on the down low, right?
Right.
They're going to be trying to hide it. If something happens, and even if they realize it, they're probably not going to be upfront about it.
All the more reason for them to not report it when something weird happens too.
Exactly.
And yeah, it's interesting. The blog post itself is very detailed, by the way. If you want like very detailed data in IOCs, it's in the blog post. It's pretty extensive, but it's a clever technique. Now, mind you, it's targeted at a very select group of potential targets who are coders and who know how to code this particular thing. But I could see this being, like you mentioned, a step to get at a very specific target. Or hey, somebody who's just, they want to steal crypto or they want to steal banking information. There's a whole bunch of options that you can do once you get your code running on somebody's machine.
Yeah, exactly. And developers, I won't say that they usually have elevated access, but they often have access to source code. And so I think there's perhaps a flavor of attack that could end up being some kind of a supply chain type attack. I don't know exactly how that would necessarily work because presumably that I would hope they're not using the same laptop, but I mean maybe they are. I don't know. But if your intention is to perform some kind of a SolarWinds style attack, and you're able to trick some developer at a victim company who's developer of the software that you're trying to attack, this might be a way to target a developer who has the access to the code that you need. So
Yeah.
um,
So from a defensive standpoint, I think everything's very situational, but I would say to those being asked to download custom code for something like this, be very, very cautious.
yeah,
And, I run it through some sort of code analysis tool, maybe. But I don't know. It's so easy to hide this stuff. I can't think of anything that's very consistently capable of detecting custom malicious code.
yeah, run it in a VM. Do your
Yeah.
this kind of stuff in a VM that doesn't have anything else. I mean, it's not perfect. It's not perfect by any stretch. Still opportunities for lateral movement, but
rather than running in your own machine, maybe you've run on one of your company's servers.
it's true. Let's throw it in a container and push it to production.
Look,
It's a great good point. I mean, because look, there's EDR on your production server, so
hopefully,
like, probably the safest place to run it.
anywho, it's an interesting one. It bears watching. I think this will continue to evolve into more sophisticated methodologies too.
Yeah,
and once these ideas get out there, they just iterate and iterate and iterate. So it's interesting to know and to watch.
exactly. All right. No defensive security podcast would be complete without another firewall story. So today's comes from the register.com, and the title here is Palo Alto Firewalls Under Attack as Miscreants Chain Flaws for Root Access. And the subheading is, if you want to avoid urgent patches, stop exposing management consoles to the public internet. And I was very happy to read that
just
one.
a revolutionary concept.
Yeah, so I don't think there's anything like super novel about this attack, but it is yet another attack against a management interface for Palo Alto, for PanOS. You know, it has no business being exposed to the internet. Now, just because it isn't exposed to the internet doesn't mean it's not vulnerable. Let's just be very clear about that. I'm not in any way asserting that the vulnerability goes away because you don't have it exposed to the internet. What I am saying is that the entire internet doesn't have an opportunity to take pot shots at your management interface if it's not exposed to the internet. Like that, something else has to also fail in order for them to be able to do that. And so, in doing so, if you're able to not put those straight on the internet, you can perhaps buy yourself a little bit of time and not have to patch within a matter of days rather than perhaps weeks or even a month as most high severity patches are applied under most patching regime.
Speaking of the entire internet taking pot shots at an interface, how's your mom?
Oh, is good. Thank you for asking. So
I'm thoughtful.
so there are several different vulnerabilities in this instance that are actively being chained together that will that will lead to a much more significant compromise than any of the vulnerabilities will on their own, which is one of the challenges I think we have as an industry with medium and low vulnerabilities, where we oftentimes are lulled into a false sense of security because, well, it's a medium, and we don't have to patch those quite as fast because it's a medium. But a lot of times those are the ones that are being actively attacked. And so I think this is another good example of why it's important to patch things that are exposed to the internet, kind of almost without regard to their severity, but also to pay attention to the vulnerabilities that are actively being exploited. And that's why things like the CISA Hev list is quite important. I'm hoping that continues on as a thing. Given what has been happening at CISA, we'll have to see. But so far, it's still there. Um, but look, this is, I think, again, a good example of why it's important to pay attention to how vulnerabilities are being exploited, not just their severity level.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And you're right. We do have this concept sometimes when we're trying to prioritize patching of, well, show me how it's vulnerable. The problem with that conversation, or show me how it can be exploited. The problem with that conversation is it is based in this expectation that the security team is as good as every potential hacker out there and can conceive of every potential wave to chain existing or unknown future exploits together in some creative way.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough to do, and it can put the security team in a bad spot where if they're forced to justify exploitability before a patch, that factor can change very rapidly in unknown and undocumented and unrealized ways. So I agree with you. If it's internet facing in any way, it should be fully patched as often as possible. But that can be difficult.
Definitely so. Definitely so. And by the way, you can partially mitigate at least the urgency by not exposing it to the goddamn internet. I don't know.
Look, we've ranted about this last episode. It's just, you're
I
right,
know.
but you're screaming into a hurricane, my friend.
Yes. Yes. So anyway, the the specific vulnerabilities I don't think are very exceptional. Um, there's two relatively minor, I think it's a low and a medium severity vulnerability chained with a high severity that can lead to complete system compromise if the device is exploited. And the exploitability is going to be proportional to how exposed it is to people trying to attack it. So again, I'm not going to say it anymore. Just
Patch your crap,
just
get the
just do it.
interface off the internet.
All right, and then the final story for today comes from hackread.com, and the title here is FBI and CISA warn of ghost ransomware, a threat to firms worldwide. Uh, I thought this was interesting because this was a very contra example of something that is apparently becoming an acute problem, yet is going against some of the trends that we've talked about in recent shows, where recently we talked about how the trend is moving away from encrypting and more towards stealing data because it's the defensive techniques and capabilities of a lot of organizations are getting to the point where they're they're having less success with encrypting systems and data, and so they're relying more on exfiltrating data and holding that for ransom. But this is an example of a threat actor who is coming on strong, and uh, while they are claiming to have stolen all of your data and offering it for ransom, in practice, they apparently steal just enough to convince you that they have your data, to help motivate you to pay. But the main damage that they're performing is actually the encryption of your system.
I get that doing just enough to get paid. I understand that fully.
Yes, yes, yes. So this particular threat actor, uh, their initial compromise is kind of boring. They're using vulnerable externally for internet facing systems. So things like Cold Fusion, FortiGate, management interfaces, Microsoft Exchange servers, SharePoint, and on and on and on. So they're attacking known vulnerable software where there are exploits available, and then that's their initial point of entry, and then from there they will move laterally. They rely very heavily on Cobalt Strike. And so anybody who's had experience with Cobalt Strike, either as a red teamer or as a blue teamer trying to clean up after it, knows that it's a pretty damn insidious piece of code that has very broad capabilities. And this particular threat actor apparently is making very good use of those capabilities to do things like steal credentials, and again move laterally throughout the organization, and ultimately push out the encryptor to your fleet of systems. So again, from a if you zoom way out, it looks like every other ransomware actor that we've seen. I think that one of the novelties here is that they are claiming to have stolen your data, but they probably actually haven't stolen most of your data. And then they also have a very heavy reliance on Cobalt Strike, which on the one hand is very sophisticated, and if you're not looking for it, super hard to detect. But on the other hand, if you are looking for it, can be fairly is detectable. So I would say at this point, if you aren't instrumented to detect Cobalt Strike in your environment, you're missing an opportunity there.
Yeah, and there's plenty of tutorials out there and IOCs to look for.
Yes.
You know, yeah, it's interesting. I think what this highlights to me is that there's no one universal truth of what bad actors are up to. You've got tons of different threat actors with different approaches, different techniques, different ideas, different efficacy, different capabilities. Some work better than others. It's something we haven't talked a lot about lately at all, is attribution. Attribution was always the thing I always frowned against, and I always felt was a bit of a shell game in terms of all these cybersecurity companies and central reporting agencies always want to throw some attribution on it. It's this group or it's that group. And in theory, that will give you information about their TTPs and their common stuff. But I always felt like as a blue teamer, I don't care. Like, I don't, they could change their tactics in a heartbeat. Who they are doesn't change my job. I still have to defend against whatever the entire fleet of common tactics are. And if I knew ahead of time that this threat actor with this set of techniques was going to come after me, yeah, I could do something about it. But you never know who's going to come after you or who's probing around or who's attacking you. And who they are doesn't really change my job. I'm not trying to go get them arrested or, shut them down or, send Liam Neeson overseas with a certain set of skills to hunt them. So I always found the emphasis on attribution odd to me, but it is the way of the industry. And I am but a small fish in a very large industry who am just a mouse amongst the dancing elephants, as I like to say.
I think, I have perhaps a new and updated perspective on that a little bit. I think that
Please.
I think there is not one single reason why people focus on attribution. I think it's different personas of people have different reasons. And so I think corporate executives, like senior executives, want to be able to attribute it because they want the ability to pin it on some specific actor. Like, it wasn't a nebulous bad person. It was like the Chinese intelligence agency or the North Koreans or like they want to be able to very specifically say that, because I think there's a view that takes some of the onus off of them as a victim and puts it more on the adversary. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm
That's
not going to
fair.
judge.
Yeah,
And I
that's
think
fair.
from a from an incident response perspective, if you know that you're being attacked by the bloody ferret or whatever bad threat actor name we come up with, um, you can and you have reasonable threat intelligence, it can help inform what you should look at next. It's not necessarily to like constrain you, but like, okay, I see evidence that it's this particular threat actor. I know that they also do X, Y, and Z, and so I'm gonna like scan my environment to see if I see any examples of X, Y, and Z. So I think it's a bit of an enabler on on accelerating incident response. It's not a panacea. It doesn't necessarily even change what the ultimate outcome is in terms of like you have to burn it all down anyway. That doesn't change, but it can help. You can help you get to a faster answer of like, where did they go and how did they get from point A to point B and whatnot. And of course, I think that the government is very interested in understanding, what threat actors are active because they want to. We're seeing it in spades right now. Like they want to have the ability to sanction entities and having some, again, whether it's accurate or not, they want to have some sense of like, we're having a huge problem with North Korean hackers attacking, chemical companies in the U.S. And so that's going to drive some kind of a response. Anyway, I think there's I don't know that it provides like a lot of information in terms of prevention. Certainly, certainly, like we should be looking at the different, which is one of the intentions of this show here, right? Is looking at the various and sundry techniques that threat actors are using, and I think, you know, it it is. I think that there are some people who believe that, you know, what I should do is figure out like which threat actors are focused on my industry, and then I can look and see like how are those threat actors attacking companies like mine, and then I can help use that to justify investment to bolster our protections. But I think that one of the challenges that I've observed personally over the course of running the show, and as you know, being a CISO and managing like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of incidents, is that the adversaries are watching each other. They're reading these reports, the same ones that we're talking about. Like the garden variety threat actors are all reading the same stuff, and they're learning. Like they have an incentive to become better at their jobs too, because it makes them more money. And so, while yes, they may start off doing things in a very certain way, I think it's a creates a false sense of security if we rely too much on those, you know, kind of defined techniques associated with a particular threat actor, because we know that they're learning. This is a like a rapidly evolving space. And so if I think we ignore things to our detriment. We can't solve everything. I get that, right? But I really think we have to have a clear-eyed view of the modern tactics that threat actors generally are using, and try to distill that into a set of protections that we implement to the best of our ability in our organization. Sorry, that was a
Yeah.
like really long diatribe there.
No, it's good. I'm glad I sparked an interesting thought path for you, or at least I like to think I did. I don't know. Uh, I tend to agree with most of that. Um, I had a thought, but I've lost it now. I think the interesting thing for me is, oh, I remember. So part of what I hear you saying is that some threat actors may be learning from our show and listening when we talk about this stuff. So I think if that's true, they should up their Patreon donation a bit.
I'm with you. I mean, like yeah, yeah.
I'm just saying, if you're a bad actor and you're getting $1.4 billion from people's, you know,
You're deriving value from the
crypto,
show, whatever that means.
call us. Well, let's work out something. I'm not saying we can be bought. I'm saying we can be rented. Anyway, no.
Yes.
No. In all seriousness, you're right. Like you need to understand what the bad actors are doing, and you need to understand how they do it and what a typical technique is, and a typical thing, especially affecting your industry. I guess where I start to go a little sideways is when people start to get really fancy with, oh, and it was this threat actor, and in fact, we think it was this person for this threat actor, and it was this. It's like, okay, that's cool, but it doesn't change my job. But you're right. Different stakeholders in this have different emphasis and different needs. And if I'm an executive talking to the press, it's nice for me to say this was a nation state attack out of China. Nothing I can do, right?
Yeah. Again, it doesn't
So
change for those of us who are down in the engine room. It doesn't change the gears and the levers that we're
right.
pulling, right? It doesn't. It really doesn't.
Yeah,
But I think it does help certain people with certain discussions, and I think that's why they're.
yeah,
And by the way, I also think that there is an aspect of this that is driven by the security industry itself. Like
sure,
that, you know,
yeah,
there is a. I think there is. I'm struggling to put it into words, but I think that security companies benefit from, optically, from being able
Mm-hmm.
to write a highly prescriptive or highly definitive report on an attack that attributes it to some particular actor in some country, and if they have like names and driver's license pictures, like even better, because then I think that creates an air of um of sophistication on the part of that company.
What's the downside? Who's going to tell them they're wrong?
Right.
Who could prove they're wrong? Right? Who like who's going to challenge you or in any way prove that you're wrong when you say this is fancy raccoon 74?
Well, other threat intelligence companies, obviously,
Maybe.
they have a they have an incentive to say, oh look, that the the Jerry Intel company is, they put out this statement and it's just full of crap. And so I suspect there's a little bit of that, but and broadly speaking, you're right.
It's it's a safe prediction. It's a safe area to have low confidence but sound like you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. By the way, I have noticed when you read late, especially as of late, when you read reports that do put some attribution, they don't spend a lot of time on it. It's usually like one sentence, but they'll say something like, we have medium to low confidence that this
Yeah.
is, which
And
that carries a lot. That one sentence in like a 10-page report's carrying a lot of water.
yeah, no kidding. Well, and to be clear, I think the techs on the ground doing the hard work are doing good work. It's often the marketing and the sales folks that
Right.
overhype and blow this stuff out of proportion and destroy credibility.
Yeah. Yep. Having said that, couple stories ago, we talked about the ESET report. I thought, for better or for worse, I thought they did a nice job, probably one of the better jobs of explaining their logic behind how they attributed it. Like, they didn't just say, and we think this is North Korea. Like they said, and here's why we think it's North Korea. It's because of we see, we know from other attacks on the laptop farm issue that we've talked about in the past. We see the same people being connected in the GitHub repositories. So like so it's reasonable. It's not 100% airtight. Could be faked, absolutely, but it's a reasonable assertion. And without them putting that out there, we would it would just kind of look like, well, they just, that I guess they thought it was coming from a North Korean IP address.
Well, the packets were labeled as coming from a Commodore 64, so
Oh, that's probably it.
I don't know.
So anyway,
I've run out of good jokes.
I think we've hit that peak altitude, and we're back on our way down now. So
Spiraling towards Mother Earth.
that's right. All right. So that is the show for today. I appreciate everybody's um, attention and listening to us. I hope you learned something. If you did enjoy the show, you can give us some 5-star love on your favorite podcast platform. And by the way, even if you didn't love us, you can still do that and then just unsubscribe like that. That's also permitted. It's amazing. But if you do like us, and you want to support our mission, we're continuing to find, hopefully, new ways of adding value. Um, we would definitely love to count you as part of our Patreon sponsorship. So you can do that on our Patreon site at patreon.com/defensivesec. I'll put a link to that in the show notes with all of the links to all the stories we talked about today. One reminder, if we do have a sister show called Getting Defensive. It's gettingdefensive.com. In that show, we interview people who are working in the industries. We like to say people who are in the engine room. So not the salespeople, not the CEOs, not the necessarily the quote big thinkers, but the actual people who are the doers. And so we would love to hear if you have any ideas, or if you yourself would like to come on and talk to us. Just drop us a line to info@defensivesecurity.org. And let's see, what else do we have? Where can people find you online?
I am hanging around both on X and your fine Mastodon server, infosec.exchange, with the same handle, Lerg, Lerg.
Awesome. And you can find me. I'm almost exclusively on infosec.exchange. It's at Jerry at infosec.exchange. And by the way, that's becoming a big thing. If you are part of the security community, you want to hang out with some like-minded people, give it a try. It's not for everybody. I will say that, but there's I think we're up to about 15,000 active people. So
it does seem to kind of like grow and shrink as things change around the social media universe.
Yes, very much so.
But it seems to be at least a good steady 15,000 from what you've told me.
Yeah, we peaked at about 50,000, and it's been holding steady at about 15 for quite some time now.
So you scared off a good 80%. That's not bad.
Yeah, probably more, but yeah. All right.
Anyway.
I appreciate everybody, and I hope you have a great week, and we will talk again real soon.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Have a good week.